We're looking now towards Sarah Ann, just in the shadow of the Hatfield family cemetery. This is Island Creek, where Devil Anse was actually baptized, and he owned a bunch of property right along here. And this leads up to the graves of many people involved in the feud, including Devil Anse himself.
These two graves right here, as you can notice, in 1911, Troy and Elias, two of Devil Anse's sons that were over liquor business, were in Boomer, West Virginia, up in Kanawha County, I think it is. And they ran into this gentleman. He was an Italian gentleman, and they had words with him before about whose territory that was, as far as selling liquor and what have you. And a gun battle ensued. And at the end of it, all three men, the Italian gentleman and two of Devil Anse's sons, were dead. And they say that somewhere around that time, that's when Devil Anse, I guess, had thought about things and ended up becoming, getting saved, getting baptized here in Island Creek, and living out his last few years. Of course, you can see that's 10 years from 1911 to 1921 when Devil Anse passed away. And so that's the story between Troy and Elias. A little tidbit of information that kind of involves me today. G.W. Hatfield built the G.W. Hatfield building in Maitland, West Virginia, which I now own, and I think I'm the first Hatfield to actually own the property since he built it in 1911. That was done the same year that these two boys died.
Now I'm going to have to do a little tour of the old Matewan house.
Yep.
Elias Hatfield was one of William Anderson's 11 sons, and although the hanging of Cotton Top is often said to be the end of the feud, Elias was killed years later, and actually the feud saw a death in 1898. He was too young to have been involved with the majority of the fighting, and was a bartender in West Virginia, and was liked by most, but a lot of people noted that Elias had a bit of a violent temper. When he heard that Doc Ellis had organized a small posse to drag in Jauncey to Pikeville, Kentucky, he vowed retribution and ran into Doc Ellis on July 4th, 1898, entering a boat. Basically, it was 4th of July celebrations along the Tug Fork, and he just so happened to run into this guy who was trying to try his family members for a feud that happened years earlier. Elias confronted Doc and said, "Hello, Elias," and Hatfield smiled ear to ear. He said, "Hello, Doc. You think you can take me back to Kentucky as easily as you did my brother?" The Doc laughed and shrugged, so Hatfield called him an SOB and turned around to talk to a bystander because he was a very personable guy. And at that moment, with his back to the doctor, Doc pulled his gun and said, "I'll show you who's an SOB." And the passenger, seeing that the Doc intended to shoot Elias, shoved him out of the way, and the bullet almost hit nearby bystanders. Elias instinctively fired a shot from his revolver from the hip, ricocheting off the Doc's watch and hitting him in the neck and killing him. Apparently blood sprayed everywhere. It was quite the scene. He hastily left for Oklahoma, but came back in 1899 and was sentenced to 13 years in prison. However, the governor pardoned him after just over one. After their new fame, he and Troy Hatfield, who's buried right next to him, worked for the Baldwin Felts for a short period of time, but soon decided to take up a legal liquor operation, and they were killed in a shootout with an immigrant in 1911.
Jauncey says Johnson Hatfield on his grave marker right to the right hand side of Devil Anse. To Devil Anse's left, the way he's standing facing us, his statue. That is Jauncey's grave. He is the son of Devil Anse that had the romance with Rosanna McCoy. And of course, Rosanna had their child, and the child didn't live very long and died shortly afterwards. There's a lot of other Hatfields and family that's buried here. Several of the family members. Cap Hatfield, although is not buried here, he's actually buried on down Route 44 here in another cemetery. Willis Hatfield, the last living child of Devil Lance is actually buried right over here, and I think he died in 1978. And you can look around and see that a lot of our family were doctors, lawyers, members of the Masons. One of our family, actually Henry D. Hatfield, went all the way to be governor of the state of West Virginia. So, and he was a senator also. So our families had a very big presence in West Virginia, especially southern West Virginia and West Virginia politics, and eastern Kentucky over the years.
We're here in the Dills Cemetery in Pikeville to tell the story of the start of the Hatfield and McCoy feud. Now, I tend to think that the real start of simmering tensions was during the Civil War, but in the fall of 1878, Floyd Hatfield drove his hogs into the pens along the riverside to fatten them up. He let them graze near the confluence of the Blackberry and Tug Forks from spring to summer before driving them back into the pens. As he drove them back to the pens, old Randall McCoy, who's buried over here in his family plot, appeared as if from nowhere, accusing Floyd Hatfield of stealing one of his hogs and rebranding it. McCoy, rather than talk, immediately filed a lawsuit, and to be fair, the jury consisted of 6 Hatfields and 6 McCoys. William Stanton, who had relatives on both sides of the conflict, was called as a witness. He claimed plainly that it was Floyd Hatfield's pig and that he saw the brand, and that old Randall McCoy was lying. In a shocking turn of events, Selkirk McCoy ruled in favor of Floyd Hatfield. The testimony of Bill Stanton left the McCoy family feeling scorned by one of their own, and so 2 years later, under very mysterious circumstances, Sam and Paris McCoy shot him in the woods and left his body to the buzzards and the hogs. As far as I can tell, Bill Stanton has no known grave. Sam McCoy would go on to shoot 78,000 squirrels with 2 rifles, which was the feat for which he was most known, going by the moniker Squirrel Huntin' Sam.
And found a clay bank, and they mixed this up and made this chinking between the logs just like they would have back in the day. And they actually hand-hewn the logs too.
And all the stone is original. You said one of your relatives actually...
Yeah, Jeremiah Hatfield supposedly built the original cabin that was here. We're at the hog trial site. 3 major things happened here. Of course, the hog trial took place here. This is supposedly where Johnson and Rosanna first met and fell in love, and then of course across the creek right here was where the election day stabbing of Ellison Hatfield by the 3 McCoy boys took place. During the hog trial cabin, one of the McCoys actually sided with the Hatfields, or voted that the Hatfields, the testimony of Bill Stanton was true, and that the Hatfields did not steal the hog that was accused, and so it didn't go as quite as a way I think that Preacher Anderson may have thought that the trial was going to go. Because
yeah, you were
6
saying...
Hatfields, 6 McCoys, they were thinking hung jury, throw it out, everybody be happy.
They just wanted to bury the hatchet right away.
Yeah, not in somebody's forehead either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Preacher Anderson and his wife, Polly.
And he presided as a justice of the peace over the pig trial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he really tried solving it by putting 6 Hatfields and 6 McCoys.
Right.
Do you think he kind of knew that tensions were simmering between the families after the death of Asa?
Possibly. I'm sure he did. He didn't live that far from Randall. What, about 2.5, almost 3 miles from Randall's home?
And Randall and William lived about, you said 6 miles as the crow flies.
Yeah. Roughly. Yes, Preacher Anderson, another Anderson Hatfield, which was a cousin to Devil Lance, was actually a justice of peace over here in Pike County, Kentucky.
Okay, and normally this would have gone a little bit further up in the courts, but you think they just kind of wanted to quickly get it done with?
That's my thoughts on it, but that's purely my thoughts on it. There's nothing to back that up.
So this naturally would have been a center for the community. It was where the trial happened. It was where different elections were held. Hatfield was the judge. They brought out 6 Hatfields and 6 McCoys, and they rebuilt it pretty recently, adding new widened doors because the county seems to want to turn this into another polling place. So they've made it kind of handicap accessible. Now, I encourage you, if you come here and it says it's open on Google Maps and no one is here to open the doors, all the locals many of them get a little bit upset because they say it's open and it's just not, and no one's ever actually out here. So if you go to the Pike County Tourism Office, just tell them, hey, I really wish somebody would actually be in the cabin, because this is one of the most important sites to the Hatfield and McCoy feud.
Well, we've done a lot of digging here on the property, and as we dig, we learn more and more things. So one thing that we learned was, this area up here was a flat area behind all this brush, that I cut out. And we thought it was the root cellar because we kept finding cannon jar lids back there. A lot of the old ones that have the white ceramic seal in them. So we found about 10 up there, so we thought it was the old cellar. So we thought, well, if we dig down far enough, we'll find, the entry, and hard to tell what's in the cellar, right? Because there's also a retaining rock wall up there. You can't really see this angle, but it's about 2 feet high. That's made out of the hand-hewed blocks from the bridge. And when we started digging more, we found a wagon spring. I don't know why it was up there, but we also found money. So, but we found no entry to a cellar. So money plus a moonshining family, plus a hidden area, plus coins that we found.
Were those the Morgan silver dollars up in the museum?
Yep, that you saw in the museum. Yep, that's exactly what we found. Yep.
How long do you think that moonshine still was open for?
Oh, I'd say at least 30, 40 years, maybe more.
If I can find a couple photos, I'll show you, but the house here, of course, is not the same as back in the day, but it used to come up pretty close to where this bridge is. It might have been a little bit further down. And what is so interesting to me here is this wall. I'll show from the other side. I'm pretty certain it dates back to the time Devil Anse was here. And this bridge, they say it's near the same place, but it's not really. It's a newer bridge. And this here is the new museum. I think the most interesting part about it is got to be that it's run by the third great-grandson of one of the feud leaders, and the beautiful weapons in the museum. Some commemorative, some actually owned by the feudists. And you can see that this actually opens in a couple weeks. This is a house built just behind where the original property was.
So this was Devil Anse's gun, passed down through the family. My Aunt Judy had it in her closet for 70 years and nobody knew. So when we opened the museum, she passed it down. Very grateful for it. This is one of my babies. The other set here that I love, this was made in honor of the peace treaty. Well, the truce is what they call it, which was done in 2003. That I'm aware of. It is the only truce that was actually documented on paper, signed, agreed to. And this side of the gun tells the Hatfield side of the story. The other side tells the McCoy side. And the pistol, the 1851 Navy Steel, was made in honor of John C. and Roseanne, the love story, and the Pawpaw Tree shooting incident over near Matewan. So if you look on the chamber there, you'll see a scene of the Pawpaw Tree shooting etched in there. Of course, on the handles, you've got John C. and Roseanne on each side. But these are two of my babies. This is my two prized possessions that I love in the museum the most. We found a lot of the artifacts here on the property. I think, as you know, this was Devil Anse's last home place. So the home itself burned down, unfortunately, in 1932, I think it was, by his youngest son, Tennis, for insurance money. And then he went to jail for insurance fraud after that. So hopefully one day we can rebuild the home place. But for now, we're operating out of this cabin. So. Which we just got complete, and very excited and thankful for. In a lot of the cabinets, you'll find artifacts that were dug up here on the property. Excuse the mess, we're still moving into new space here. But you'll find artifacts that we dug up here on the property, as well as passed down through the family. And of course, the media's always been fascinated with us, so you'll have lots of, antique books and media, first editions that were put out. So, but enjoy it.
And what is your relationship to the Hatfield family?
I'm Dave Lance's great-grandson, third generation.
And what I think is always interesting is there's no more simmering hard feelings.
I'd say these days it's more over, the correct story, which will never really be told because both families were embarrassed of the feud and the descendants did not talk about it. So it was something that was kept hush-hush. It wasn't anything either family was proud of. So a lot of the things were not passed down from the elders for that reason. So unfortunately that leaves us with a lot of speculation on certain events and things and dates that happened. People pull from newspaper clippings and various ways to find information, but we've all heard of fake news, right? So, you can't trust a newspaper at all, honestly, unfortunately. Everything's the opinion of the writer, and some writers like to make a lot of fluff. So, some things are up for debate over that, so you'll find the feud more over that and over those of us that are trying to preserve it versus trying to make $1 off of it. So that's kind of more of the feud these days. If I had to say there was anything going, it would be that. Otherwise, no, the families both get along very well. They have for years and generations and intermarry before and after the feud. So, no, I wouldn't say there's any. Now, there's some fake shows that are made showing hostility, things of that nature, but that's not true. To them for 10 years. Nope. And if she would lease it to them for 10 years, they'd incorporate that.
Yeah.
That's my reason for asking.
Okay.
Society.
I just want to know what was.
I'm telling you now, David, if you're smart, you'll stay away from them people. It's bad. Let me tell you what he does. The neighbors, this Devlin's farm, past the trees. He mows that for free to the neighbor. Keep an eye on the senator. He said, you need to get that man off your organization. And they were like, is he on your board? I was like, no. I said, that's the whole
I'm just wondering. That's it.
And in the shadow of the patriarch of the McCoy clan's grave, you have his daughter, Rosanna McCoy. And in 1880, she became the Juliet to the Romeo of the son of Devil Anse Hatfield. They both met inside of the very cabin where this pig trial had taken place, and, many say, began the Hatfield and McCoy feud. Of course, neither of their fathers approved of this relationship, and eventually it ended in tragedy. In 1882, a fight broke out again at the same cabin, and 3 of the McCoy's sons killed Hatfield's drunk brother. In fact, he was stabbed 27 times, which would escalate into the infamous pawpaw tree incident, often seen as the most violent incident of bloodshed in the Hatfield and McCoy feud.
Aunt Betty's house, as they call it. This home used to sit right here in this low spot, and so they moved it over there for flood control and to protect it. They're getting ready to have the McCoy reunion. They actually a lot of them, we got a whole house full staying with us at the end.
That's kind of
Every room was rented by McCoy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the story with this house?
This is where the cabin is actually in the this end of the home place. And this is where Aunt Betty lived, and Rosanna came to have the baby that was between her and Johnsy.
We're here at the old McCoy property just west of the town of Matewan, and as the feud started, these folks lived about 6 miles apart from each other as the crow flies along the Tug Fork River. And here is the grave of little Sally, who was the daughter of Rosanna McCoy and John C. Hatfield. She was born in the spring of 1881 and died when she was only 8 months old. In 1880, Rosanna met John C. at an Election Day celebration on Blackberry Creek in Pike County, Kentucky. They slipped away from the crowd, and when they returned, the polling place was deserted. Fearful of her family's reaction, Rosanna went home to John C. in West Virginia. However, Devil Anse would not allow his son to wed the daughter of Randolph McCoy. Rosanna loved John C. and stayed with him in Devil Anse's home, but she became discouraged because he was an unfaithful person. Disillusioned, she returned home to Kentucky to have John C.'s baby. Her father rejected her, and Rosanna went to live with her Aunt Betty at Springtown, which is the cabin at the foot of this cemetery. Sarah Elizabeth is buried on the hilltop under the pine trees above Uriah McCoy's house. Heartbroken after the baby's death, Rosanna grieved at the grave and lost her will to live. And the grave of the baby is just up here.
The mini-series that Kevin Costner started and put us on the map. It's about 60% accurate. I'm sure Dave has mentioned that to you. There's things in it correct, there's things wrong, there's things they left out. Filmed in Romania, wasn't even filmed in the United States. So I'm going to show you the things that I know and the little sites you're going to see, and that's basically what I try to do, is let people in on that. You're on Randall McCoy property. In the mini-series, all McCoys were in Kentucky, all Hatfields in West Virginia, and that is inaccurate. When Randall and Sarah got married in 1849, they and both of their families lived in West Virginia. And then her dad gave her this property. They moved here in 1850. Right up there is where the house sat. And if you want to pan around, you can, or if you want to keep it on me, whatever. But that's Randall's hand-dug well up there that was dug in 1850. When you get up there and you look down in it, from ground level down, it's not been touched. The original well box was a wooden well box, and it, of course, has long been replaced. The three houses here in a row, this one and the next couple over, were all related, and they all used that well water till city water came up here in 1998. So you can tell that's a good well. Behind that well, there's a sign sticking up on the ground to do with the diggers from the digger shop. This picture here, they do metal detection, and in that picture, they're actually digging out part of a metal grate from Randall McCoy's fireplace. They found bullets on each hillside from the gun battle, and more than likely, they were McCoy bullets firing back at the Hatfields. Where we're standing and sitting, now we get up for this one, is where the barn was at. We've actually found old horseshoes from the barn, an old hammerhead, no marking on it, nothing marked to let us know what year, but you can tell it's old. Found this old hand-forged tool that more than likely is to do with punching holes in leather or whatever from the barn. University of Kentucky's archaeological team's been here. We found that old shoe. I thought it was a horseshoe, but she tells me in the day and time that Randall lived here, they plowed with oxen, and that was one side or a half side of an ox shoe, their cloven hoof, which definitely dates to the 1860s and so forth. So that all backs up that this is where the animals and so forth were at. Over here in the parking lot, we got a sign that talks about the cemetery that you can't go see. Right around this curve, about 130 yards, there's a little house on the hill. Behind it is the cemetery. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, in the cemetery is where they buried the three brothers. They buried them on the hill where they could come out on their porch, check across the way and see where they were at. A son named William passed away not long after that. He's buried there. And then in 1888, when the house was burnt, Calvin and Alifair were killed. They are buried there. So there's 6 of them. In 1975, the McCoys were allowed to put this monument. It's on the right page. And it's a good-sized monument, paid for by the McCoys. The next summer, they had a dedication ceremony. And these 2 old men were the guests of honor. I was a junior in high school, Dave and I actually got to meet and chat with these 2 men. This is Jim McCoy and Willis Hatfield, the last 2 immediate family members still alive. Jim McCoy, there were several Jims. He is a nephew of Randall, born in early 1884. He had turned 5 when the house was burnt, and some of the things he could tell you about the house is just amazing, and about the area and the property. He was a grandfather to my buddy Jimmy Wolford, and he could explain a lot of things to us. This other man, is Willis Hatfield. He was born February 10th, a little over a month after this house was burnt. That is Devil Anse Hatfield's next to youngest son. The old man here is that little boy right there in the famous photo. Well, right after they had the ceremony in '76, I don't know all the ins and outs, but there were a couple McCoys came in here from, I think one was from Waynesboro, Virginia or somewhere, one was from Durham, North Carolina, and I don't know all the ins and outs. And they get into it with this gentleman over here that owns the property. Now, I've heard several different stories. Some say it's his fault. Now I'm hearing some say it's not his fault. I don't know. I wasn't there. All I know is right after they had that ceremony, the cemetery was shut down. Nobody was coming at that time. So basically when he did that, he shut the family out of the cemetery. There was a court battle. To me, I think it was the McCoys that initiated the court. And then they finally agreed and they said, hey, you can go visit twice a year or whatever. Now the reason it's up here, he would not allow on his property, but his name, ironically, is John Vance.
And this is the site of the infamous New Year's 1888 massacre on Randall McCoy's family at the cabin that he owned. This is actually the original well right here. Originally scheduled for New Year's Eve, the attack had to be postponed until the night after because somebody knocked over a fence making too much noise. They returned the following night and carried out the ill-fated raid. Two of the McCoy boys, Alfair and Kelvin, were killed, and his wife Sarah was beaten nearly to death with the butt of a Hatfield rifle. Rather than the simple cabin that appears in the miniseries, the McCoy cabin actually had two large rooms separated by a covered porch. During the pitched gunfight, the Hatfields set the McCoy house on fire. Teenager Calvin McCoy fired at the attackers through the gun ports cut in the roof until he was smoked out. He and his older sister, Alfair, were shot and killed. Their mother, Sarah, survived the brutal blow from the butt of a gun. Although it does not appear so in the miniseries, Calvin nearly got away. A fluke shot in the dark hit him in the back of the head a long distance after he tried to seek shelter in a corn crib.
And Devil Anse's mother was a Vance, and that's the reason he called Jim Vance Uncle Jim.
And he was born up in this holler.
Devil Anse was born in this holler. Yeah. 1839.
And they haven't found any remains of where he was born specifically?
I don't know the specific location up here. Some of these people up in the holler here might know. It'd be a good thing if you had all day sometime and you can actually find somebody that do.
Do you think people would be friendly enough if you knocked on their door and asked, or do you think that would be something?
Maybe.
Don't immediately shove a camera in their face, I'm guessing.
And some people would probably tell you, hey, I know where it was at, and they have no clue.
I've had a couple of people in the past do that to my videos where they'll be like, oh yeah, he's buried up in that cemetery, and they'll just point me to the wrong place entirely.
Exactly.
But this is where the clan started.
Yep. And like I said, All, which was Ephraim Hatfield that settled in the area around 1800 or shortly thereafter, this is where a lot of the children from the first marriage of Ephraim actually settled when they came into this area. It was here on Mate Creek. Markers right here, you can't even tell what's on them. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, they're very old.
Yes.
Well, I guess if you get up very close, you can read some of them.
A friend of mine is actually, he's in his late 80s, early 90s, and before he passes, he is trying to actually document who is buried at each one of these sites, so he can map.
You got Elizabeth Norman here,
Yeah.
1848, 1922.
The Normans and the Boyds were married into the Hatfield family too. Okay?
Oh, is this F of all?
Right over here.
And he
Yeah,
was
it's all here.
the progenitor of the Hatfield clan.
Yeah. Now this is, that's Eve of All's grave, and this is Anna's buried here. And if you read her story here, it's pretty interesting. She was married quite a few times, and how Ephraim first met her was he was actually on a search party that went out to rescue her from the Indians.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So there were like Indian battles up until around what years would that?
Well, I mean, you know, you're talking into the 1800s probably.
Right, I would imagine right before Indian removal.
Yes, right before the Trail of Tears. But anyhow, you can read on that there. She had a very interesting life prior to meeting Ephraim.
On the opposite side of the Tug Fork River there is land that was owned until fairly recently by the Klein family. I believe it was Peter Klein, at least that's what the great-great-great-grandson of Devil Anse tells me. But basically this deal was made many years before the railroad came through, and the 5,000 acres on the left-hand side of the railroad, in the West Virginia side, you know, Devil Anse got a very good deal because the Klein family felt that the grass was greener on the other side, and so they basically swapped over the river and gave Devil Anse the 5,000 acres on the left. Well, Devil Anse realizes that he could have an extensive logging operation. He, in fact, used this area as a staging for logs. They would float down the river and he would have them here and send them further down the river. So when the railroads came through, he's actually seen in a photograph with railroad surveyors. He was sued 19 times by the Klein family that lived across the river in Kentucky because they felt that they were the rightful owners of this disputed 5,000 acres. And this is also the site, because we're on 5,000 acres of old Hatfield land, but this is the site of the Battle of Grapevine. Now, the Grapevine battle took place about a week after that massacre in 1888, the New Year's Massacre. A few weeks after the massacre of the McCoys in 1888, a very large force of Kentuckians felt righteously very mad at the cold-blooded murders. They launched a raid against Cap Hatfield and Jim Vance, and Bad Frank was there for the action. They surrounded Cap and Jim, and a battle erupted. Jim Vance was wounded, and while bleeding, Bad Frank walked up and calmly executed him.
The tourism Pike County. But this is a outline, this wall outlines and represents the Tug River. As you'll see on the concrete there, that's West Virginia. Over here is Kentucky. On the Kentucky side, on the top of the wall, there's a plaque that reads the McCoy side of the story. On the top of the wall on the West Virginia side, there's a plaque that reads the Hatfield side of the story. Very interesting. And over there is a monument to the Hatfields and McCoys. The rest of the monument, which has Rosanna, McCoy, and Johnson's Hatfield's likenesses, and Devil Anse, or William Anderson Hatfield, and Randall McCoy, their likenesses, and has a little bit of history on them. Harmon McCoy, he was killed. Some people say that's what started the Hatfield-McCoy feud. 4 months before the end of the Civil War, in January 1865, he was killed by the local militia headed up by the Hatfields. Not because he was a McCoy, but because he was a Union soldier. And this marker is actually in the vicinity of where he would have been killed. We're going to take you up here to the what we call the mouth of the holler, of where he would have been killed at. And somewhere back in the mountains, right up through here, is where he would have been killed.
We're in the Alley Cemetery in Pike County, West Virginia, to see the grave of Jeremiah Hatfield. David Hatfield and I just visited Asa Harmon McCoy's killing site, and he said, why don't you show Jeremiah's grave? And it kind of proves that both families fought on both sides of the Civil War. A lot of people say that Asa Harmon McCoy was killed because he fought for the Union, and that this sort of began the feud. In reality, there were people who fought in the Union on the Hatfield side as well. And what's interesting here is that Jeremiah Hatfield supposedly built the original pig trial cabin. So that's his only real connection, as far as I can find, to the Hatfield and McCoy feud. But he was the son of F of All and the great-great-great-grandfather of David Hatfield, the man offering this tour.
And you can roll down the window and take video and stuff. This is Goldie's store here. and this was in the Browning family. And you can record this if you want to, as far as audio. This is in the Browning family, and it's been here. This is one of the oldest standing buildings in Mingo County, and it's no longer open to the public for, as you can see, obvious reasons. It's in disrepair. But anyhow, this is where Devil Anse supposedly stayed, in the upper room up here, in the bed upstairs, when he was hiding out from time to time, being hunted. And the Browning family was married into the Hatfield family. So if you go straight across the mountain here, that would have been in on the 5,000 acres and where Devil Anse lived during the feud. It was just a very short distance from here if you take the most direct route. McCoy White Line, and supposedly this is where they would come and get their supplies to make their liquor out of on that show.
Well, that's not
which was
accurate,
totally
you don't think?
fictitious.
Yeah.
But anyhow, that's I'd love to see that old building get rebuilt and everything, but
It'll be sad to watch it kind of
yeah,
decay over the
it's
years.
almost in that condition right now. If I had the money, I'd rebuild it tomorrow. I mean, you know, sure it up and put a new roof on it. But
And before leaving the Dills Cemetery, I want to show you a couple of the Civil War graves here. Now, it's very well known that leaders in both the Hatfields and the McCoys both supported the Confederacy, but what you got when you got to far southeastern Kentucky is you had quite a few people joining the Union. In fact, I haven't really seen any Confederate-style graves here, although old Randall was himself in the Confederacy. He was, I believe, in the partisan units, but these guys oftentimes would join the Union because it was such a wild, lawless, and remote area that in especially counties like Harlan, you would have Confederate armies marching in, scavenging for food, and then leaving. Basically, everybody was starving, and they saw the depredations meted out to them by the Confederacy, and a lot of them decided to join the Union, more or less as state guard, basically the Union equivalent of the Home Guard, and it was a very brutal time of partisan warfare. And of course, over here you've got old Randall himself, and the beginning of the feud. You know, I would call it a toss-up because they killed Asa Harmon McCoy, and I'm not sure if that began the feud or if the feud began with the pig incident, because Asa Harmon McCoy was killed, but after that it just seemed like they were trying to let bygones be bygones up until the pig incident. In fact, Find a Grave actually lists Asa Harmon McCoy as someone who is buried in this cemetery. So the feud's nature is, you know, it stretches way back to before the hog incident, because that's just such a complicated feud.
where Ellis and Hatfield, Devil Anse's brother that was stabbed 20-some times and shot by the McCoy boys, this is where Ellison lived at during the feud, was up in this hollow right here. So they placed the marker about Ellison at the mouth of the hollow here, which was basically talking about the area where he, here at, how it starts, the van starts slipping right there. Yeah, it gets stuck on flat ground. So note to self, if you ever buy another van, buy all-wheel drive. Now, Ellison, when they stabbed him, like within minutes after the stabbing, there's an old story that says that one of the McCoy boys ran, and another one of the brothers that wasn't involved actually came down and said, "What's going on?" And he said, we've killed him, and all this, and handed him a knife, and he was one of them that actually ended up getting shot.
That's sad.
Now, whether that's a true story or not, I don't know. Talk about divided loyalties. That mainly talked about the Civil War, and you know how West Virginia became a state right during the Civil War, and how people in this area were kind of caught in that whole dynamic there of you know, being for the North or the South, and then all of a sudden they're in a southern state of Virginia, and now they're in the northern sympathizing state of West Virginia. And so that happened June 20th, 1863, when West Virginia became a state. And then, of course, right here is the marker of the Hatfield-McCoy feud. This is where Ellison Hatfield was brought to, and he was doctored right over here in the mouth of this holler. He lay here for almost 2 days before he passed away. And so that's what happened right here. This is also the site in the holler right here where Stone Mountain Coal Company, what the strike and all the massacre and all this was about, that's where their mine was actually at. One of their portals was up in this holler right here. So, but this is where the pawpaw tree incident took place, near here or in this vicinity. And of course, this is what a pawpaw tree looks like. There might actually be, yes there is, there's some fruit on it now. It's not actually ripe yet. When they are almost black and hitting the ground, that's when they are ripe and ready to eat.
Can you explain a little bit about what happened at the pawpaw?
Basically, the 3 McCoy boys that were accused of stabbing Ellison 26 to 27 plus times and then shot him in the back. When Ellison died, they basically brought him over here. There was no trial, and they executed him.
And so that was that would be an illegal.
Oh, it was an out and out, yeah. But it was a I guess a way of venting frustration that your brother had just been murdered, and basically they were giving back what they thought in proportion as punishment.
They said Ellison lived 2 full days.
Almost 2 full days before he passed away.
They didn't intend on killing the McCoy boys unless Ellison died, though, right?
That was the story. Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I think you said that the actual site of the pawpaw incident might have been about 50 yards upriver.
Yeah, it was in this vicinity. But this is a pawpaw tree, and it's actually bearing fruit right now.
Oh, I see a little bit of fruit up there.
Yep. Well, there's one right here, actually. It's a small one. They're just now getting started. By around the end of July, early August, it'll be bearing a lot. Now, another little tidbit of story that may or may not be true. It was told to me by someone, and then like I said, this story may not be true at all, but that a Hatfield gentleman that lived near where Randall and them lived at over at Hardy came by here shortly after those boys had been shot, recognized who they were, thought it was horrible that they were hanging there, you know what I'm saying, being left. And he loaded them up and took them back to their family.
And aren't they buried near their cabin?
Yeah, they're buried near the cabin over there. And that took a lot of guts, being a Hatfield, taking those boys back over there. But he did that, from what I was told, out of respect to the family and the fact that they were neighbors.
And the election grounds where Ellison Hatfield was stabbed, that was actually right across the creek here and not in the cabin itself, although the cabin is right here.